Good afternoon. I'm Monica Trousey from the E&E News newsroom. Thank you for joining us for our Facebook Live discussion on what last night's election results will mean for energy and environment issues moving forward. It is a lot to unpack, so we have the best in the business here, my colleagues Robin Bravender, Evan Lehman, Josh Kurtz, and Jeff Coase. We're going to walk through it all and hopefully answer some questions of yours. If you do have questions, feel free to input them in the comments section, and we hope to get to those as well. So guys, last night's results, turning the energy and environment world on its side, yeah? What are your initial reactions? Talk a bit about your reporting experiences last night. We have a lot we need to get to as well in terms of Clean Power Plan, Paris, and all of the energy industries that we cover. So tell me, last night, how'd it go?
A few of us were in the newsroom pretty late.
Yeah.
Evan, Josh, and I were here. Jeff was preparing for today, watching the returns from home, I imagine. But yeah, I had started with a likely Clinton win story, and at some point I said to Josh, I should probably start writing the Trump version. So frantically made some calls and hustled that one out.
Luckily, people were around and willing to, all too willing to chat at odd hours of the night.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone was out at some victory party. Some of them turned out to be victory parties, others didn't.
That's right.
We actually had some reporters come back into the newsroom at midnight and start writing about the impacts on the Clean Power Plan and things like that, which I've never seen happen before. I also had a Clinton story pretty much completely written, and then had to shift gears at 11 or 11:30 or so.
Yeah.
I'll have to give those to the museum or something, I think.
Good idea.
I wasn't expecting a Trump victory at all. So
I don't think anybody was.
And some of the thoughts I had last night was just about all of the bills the House has passed over the last few years addressing EPA, and they couldn't go anywhere in the Senate, and they're still going to be subject to the 60-vote filibuster there. But having a partner in the White House for Republicans is going to be huge, and there will be methods for getting some of those things past the finish line. Budget reconciliation is not subject to the filibuster. There's the Congressional Review Act, which has not been a very strong tool in the past, but it allows Congress to nullify rules by a simple majority vote. And now with a president who's willing to sign that, that's a whole new ballgame.
Yeah. All right, so let's start sort of walking through all the big things that matter to our audience. Climate change, a central part of the Obama legacy. I'm hearing from my sources this morning that we could see all of that unravel pretty quickly and pretty dramatically under a Trump administration. What does this mean for the Clean Power Plan? I mean, currently it's before the D.C. Circuit. We're awaiting a decision, but despite that, the fate of the plan could really be at risk. What comes next?
Trump could decide not to defend those rules in court, so it's pending before the D.C. Circuit now. Could ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court, where Trump is now likely to put the next justice. And as we've seen before with the stay of the Clean Power Plan, the 5-4 split indicates the court could overturn that independent of what Trump does. So we could also see Trump not take any further action. I heard someone say that he might try to rescind the endangerment finding, which gives EPA sort of lays the groundwork for doing all these climate rules to begin with. So that's another thing we could see from a Trump EPA.
Right.
I mean, one of the most interesting elements of the outcome last night to me was the sort of electoral oomph of climate, that it just wasn't there last night, right? I mean, we've heard for 8 years, ever since Obama took office, that young people, women, minorities are all eager to cast a vote based on climate change. We've seen studies that say, people are 3 times as more likely to support a candidate who wants to act on climate change aggressively versus someone who doesn't, and none of that materialized last night. So
I mean, I've always been a little skeptical of those polls and studies, but I mean, it was certainly played out last night. I mean, I think a lot of people care about it, but it's not like something to mobilize voters and get them marching to the polls.
So the other big thing, specifically on climate policy, so our colleague Gene Chemnick is heading over to Marrakesh for COP22. The results of this election are going to completely rock those discussions. I mean, this completely impacts the future of the Paris Agreement, whether the U.S. is going to meet the targets that it has promised to meet as part of that. How does this affect international climate action and the way that the U.S. is perceived internationally as well? Anyone
Well,
know?
I mean, this COP was not expected to be a particularly, some housekeeping was going to get done, but it wasn't seen as a particularly explosive one. I think just I can't even begin to imagine what the mood is going to be like over there. And yeah, I mean, it blows up 8 years of hard work that the Obama administration has put into this topic and into sort of forging international alliances and stuff like that. And who knows what America's posture is going to be like going forward, and if any other country or series of countries are willing to kind of pick up the ball with this.
Right. And to exit the Paris Agreement, it would take a few years if that was the move that the administration wanted to take. However, just making a declaration that the choice is not to meet the targets, I think, would be
right.
The swiftest.
And there are funding things too that the administration can do. I mean, Obama has set aside money for this International Green Climate Fund.
Right.
That's probably gone pretty quickly. Stuff like that.
And I think the timing is in dispute. I talked to a source who's close to the Trump campaign last night, and they think that you could simply just cancel the signature on on the agreement basically on the first day, and that's something that is one option that Trump is considering at this point, among others. There's also sort of this idea that maybe he wouldn't do that. Maybe he would sort of declare his intention to do that, but then, perhaps, use that threat to, renegotiate on other things, on trade or something like that.
So let's talk about coal. We heard a lot about the coal industry from Trump on the campaign trail. He specifically promised to bring jobs back to coal country. That's a promise that's not quite in line with what we see the market doing and where we see investments. So how might that actually play out, and is he going to be able to make good on these promises that he made?
Well, there's a lot of market forces involved, but one thing that he could do is push policies that would ease access for exploring for coal on public lands, and I think that's something that people are anticipating that they will do early on.
But you mentioned market forces. Trump has also said he's very supportive of the natural gas industry and of fracking, and natural gas and coal are often at loggerheads and competing in the market. So it'd be sort of interesting to see if he can pull all that off.
And do you think ultimately we'll see him get behind clean energy and renewables, because the prices have come down so much, and just in terms of investments, we see a lot of interest from companies nationally and internationally as well in putting their money in renewables. So is he going to go in that direction, do you think?
He might. I was talking to one source last night who said he's just not going to pick winners and losers here. He's pro-renewable, pro-fossil fuels, whatever makes sense in the market.
Pro-energy across the board, but I think when it comes to pushing for some of the tax credits that are always a big point of contention, I think that the Trump administration is going to clearly fall on the side of being opposed to those extensions.
But interesting that we saw oil prices decline last night as a result. I mean, we saw markets going crazy, but as a result of sort of the uncertainty that was playing out last night. But ultimately, the oil industry is happy today. Yes. Relatively more than they have been in the last 8 years, for sure.
As happy as they could be.
Yeah.
On renewables, I mean, Trump has, sort of upended that discussion too, right? I mean, polls show that pretty much everybody likes renewables. Republicans, Democrats. You saw Mitt Romney, you saw John McCain in previous elections, talk favorably about these issues, and but for his part, Trump, went into this campaign talking about sort of the environmental impact from windmills on dead eagles and on birds and things like that. He's opposed an offshore wind project in Scotland that would loom over his golf course there. So he's just sort of upended even sort of basic discussions on renewable energy.
And Monica, you mentioned oil being potentially happy. From a regulatory perspective, I think probably there's a lot industry likes about Trump, but at the same time, people I'm talking to are saying there's still a lot of uncertainty. Just with the Clinton administration, you would have known exactly who to talk to, who was running things. There's a lot more uncertainty here with Trump. People don't know who's going to be getting these top jobs or what he might do exactly on energy policy.
And that transitions us perfectly into the transition, which you've been doing a lot of work on. Who do we know is involved in the Trump transition, and what can we expect at this point?
Yeah, we know a lot of his top energy advisors. We've got Harold Hamm, Kevin Kramer. People in the transition team include Mike Catanzaro, who's a longtime Hill energy aide, Mike McKenna, Myron Ebel leading the EPA transition team, and others. And they're ready to go. They're holding a meeting today. All of the transition folks have an all-hands-on-deck meeting, so soon they'll be able to go into these agencies and actually get started. They'll be interviewing agency personnel and starting to draft their policy memos.
So I'm hearing that the mood at EPA, DOE, is one of concern. Is that kind of what you guys are hearing as well? And are you expecting some kind of an exodus or a lot of movement to happen as a result of this move, even from the career folks who are there?
I think at EPA in particular, where Trump has said he might like to abolish the agency, although I think most folks don't think that will actually happen. He's certainly signaled some real reforms. Appointing a climate skeptic to lead his EPA transition team probably doesn't sit well with a lot of the EPA career staffers. But yeah, I think a lot of people probably can't afford to just leave right away. But I think in terms of retirements, a lot of people who haven't been retiring, a lot of people started at EPA when the agency was formed, so in 1970, so they're now reaching retirement age and might leave where they otherwise wouldn't have.
So Josh, what kind of relationship can we expect between Trump and this new Republican majority, or not new, but the Republican majority House and Senate, and who is he closest to on the Hill that might be able to help in the transition?
We don't really know what his relationship is going to be like with these guys because it's been pretty contentious up until now. Now certainly, Speaker Paul Ryan, Majority Leader, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are saying, nice things about him. Ryan today acknowledged that, they minimized their losses this election day in part because of Trump's strength on the ballot. But these are sort of career Washington guys, and he was promising to come in and blow the place up. Right now everybody's singing Kumbaya, but how long will it last? And Trump doesn't have too many close allies on Capitol Hill. We mentioned Kevin Kramer, the congressman from North Dakota. Certainly the person he's closest with is Jeff Sessions, the senator from Alabama. He's pretty close to Chris Collins, a congressman from western New York. But beyond that, he doesn't have a lot of close ties.
Some of those people have been floated for possible cabinet positions too. So does he leave them in the Congress in an attempt to keep those ties there instead of putting them in top positions?
Yeah.
I think they're going to be leaning heavily on Mike Pence, who was a member of Congress and was in the House leadership, to really sort of gel between the congressional Republicans and this new administration. I was on a webinar this morning where Kay Bailey Hutchison, the former Texas Republican senator, essentially said that. She pointed out that Pence and Paul Ryan are very close personally and worked together for many years. And I think the sense is that it's going to be Pence who's going to be doing the heavy lifting on legislation and working with the Hill. Yeah.
Let's not forget, too, that, it isn't just a question of relationships. A lot of what Trump has said throughout the campaign has not been in line with kind of longtime Republican orthodoxy, and so they could be at loggerheads on some issues. Trade comes to mind immediately, but there could well be others.
And when Speaker Ryan spoke this morning, he specifically was trying to unify and talked about working together. Is his post safe? Will he stay as Speaker, or is that in question?
He's probably safe, but there are a bunch of cross currents going on. Certainly last night in the broad commentary, people on the left and the right were suggesting Trump could seek vengeance and maybe would try to replace him. The Conservative Freedom Caucus is certainly flexing its muscle and kind of making certain demands on him. he probably has the votes, and and certainly now we've probably closed the door on the idea of him running for president in 2020. So there's some thought maybe he didn't want to be speaker if he was going to run against President Hillary Clinton in 2020. But with that option closed, he's much more likely to stick around, I think.
It's also unclear who would replace Ryan if he wasn't in that position.
There's
I
nobody
haven't
in
seen
waiting.
anyone who seems to be a viable candidate at this point, and that was the struggle last year when Boehner left. So I would guess that he'll probably weather the storm, Ryan, but we'll see.
Americans sent a pretty clear signal last night when they voted. Does the result put pressure on Congress to actually get stuff done? And will we see actual work coming out of Congress?
Well, I think anytime, one party controls the executive branch and both chambers of Congress, there's automatically more pressure. And 2018 is just around the corner, and, midterm elections are often tough on the party of the president in the White House, so I think it ratchets up the pressure all the more so on Republicans to get something done.
We'll get some sense of that next week when members return for the lame duck session, which could have been big, but I'm guessing now it may be somewhat abridged than what people were expecting. I mean, I think Merrick Garland is not going to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. I don't think that there's going to be it's possible there could be a vote on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it seems pretty unlikely given Trump's opposition to that and the past comments of Ryan, Mitch McConnell. There is the energy bill.
What are its prospects, do you think?
Well, I think on the Senate side, the senators who are on the conference committee, Maria Cantwell, the ranking member on energy, and Lisa Murkowski, the chairwoman, have always said that they intend to push it to completion during the lame duck. They always say there's been so much work that's gone into it. I think they'll probably stick to that position publicly, but I feel like knowing that there's going to be a Donald Trump in the White House, the House probably is going to be less likely to make some of the tough deals that the Democrats are going to demand in the Senate, and they're not going to want to negotiate with the Obama White House. So I would say the odds for finishing that this year are not impossible, but probably just felt somewhat.
And so what does President Obama do in his final months? I mean, especially knowing this new reality, what is he going to try to push?
Probably the same agenda that he would have pushed otherwise, maybe a little bit more aggressively. There are a number of monument designations that could be teed up, that could come at any minute. President Clinton pushed a bunch of those through right before leaving the White House. Obama could do the same thing. He was expected to do those anyway, although there might be more of an impetus to do that now that Clinton isn't going to be coming into the White House next. There are also last-minute rules, midnight regulations that could come down, probably some smaller rules given that the bigger ones take a while, but those could come out between now and January. Pardons. Not sure if there are any environmental criminals out there, but he could certainly issue some pardons between now and then.
Right. So any predictions about what the 2018 election cycle is going to shape up to look like, or are we just in a completely new world?
Well, go ahead.
I was just say for the Senate, it's going to be a very 2018 is going to be a very tough year for the Democrats in the Senate because this supposedly was going to be a tough year for Republicans because they had 24 senators incumbents up for re-election, and I think there were only 8 Democrats, and the Democrats, what do they pick up, 1 seat?
Maybe 2.
Yeah, maybe 2, depending on what happened in New Hampshire. But it's going to be the complete opposite in 2018 because I think there's 24 or 25 Democrats, including some of the ones who are from, the kind of the red state Democrats, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Donnelly, and a few others, Joe Manchin, who fossil fuel issues are sort of a tough issue for them anyway.
This morning I was hearing some chatter about KXL back on the map. Is it back on the map? Can we expect that next year we're going to relive Keystone XL discussions, do you think?
Well, I think TransCanada, I was at in Cleveland, there was someone from TransCanada who spoke at one of the events that I was at, and they made clear they were waiting to see
how the Republican convention.
Yeah, the Republican convention. They were waiting to see, how the election turned out. So it didn't surprise me at all.
So we actually have a question from our viewers. And so here it is. There's a growing number of conservatives pushing for clean energy and warning about climate change. Will those voices stand out more now that they don't have to fight a Democratic White House? The conservative clean energy movement. Jay Fason's brought a part of it. I mean, it's there.
Yeah, it's there. I mean, you've got the Niskanen Center and the R Street Institute, both of which support a carbon tax. So they don't have to fight a Democratic White House now that believes in climate change. Now they're going up against a Republican White House that doesn't believe in climate change. So what the net change there is, I couldn't say, but I think that the Gibson 13 has lost some members last night. I would say that this is going to be an uphill battle for them. Unless there's a deal to be struck regarding tax reform or some other sort of maybe perhaps far-fetched scenario. A lot of it depends on what happens with the Clean Power Plan, right? I mean, that's the leverage right there. That's sort of the ticket to getting legislation. A lot of people feel like, if you can preempt that through some sort of legislation, then maybe you can get rid of the Clean Power Plan. But is that even a scenario that has a heartbeat anymore? Because Trump has promised to get rid of it, and if he doesn't, his courts could. So these scenarios that had been sort of floated around are, I think, completely puzzled up now.
Yeah, but do you think we'll see a movement in Congress to move some kind of climate legislation?
No.
In lieu of the Clean Power Plan? No.
Highly unlikely.
No.
I don't think so.
So if the Clean Power Plan goes, then that's it.
I would say so, although one area where people are already talking about where there could be potential traction is broader tax reform. And in the context of that, and you made an allusion, Evan, to something being far-fetched, but one idea is that a carbon tax could emerge in the context of broader tax reform. And I know that a lot of conservatives and Republican operatives would sort of, laugh at that option, but there will be a huge push for revenues. So maybe as Kevin Cramer, who's the North Dakota congressman who's been advising Trump, has been open to the idea in the context of broader tax reform. So, far-fetched, yes, but impossible, no.
Mm-hmm. But Speaker Ryan is certainly wants some kind of tax reform package, and certainly and some other top-level Hill Republicans do too. So something could get folded up into that. It's true.
So it was certainly a dynamic night. Very late night for all of us, right?
Yeah.
We were saying before we came on the number of hours that we all slept. I think it was probably under 8 collectively. So thank you for watching, and thank you guys.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks.
Thank you.